Have you ever heard the stories of the backrooms? The endless rooms trapped in another dimension that serves as eternal labyrinths for those who make the mistake of stumbling into them. My name is Roger, and I was trapped in a back room. But unlike almost everyone who enters, I escaped to tell the story. It all started several years ago. At that time, I was as fanatical as everyone else who had seen the backroom video. There were many types of videos. The classic one of the yellow office doors. Others were in more hidden and strange places, but the one that caught my attention was the grocery store back room. In the video, the place looked like an ordinary grocery store, but with endlessly long aisles and gondolas. By day, the place seemed harmless, just a maze to be overcome. The problem came at night. When the grocery store was on regular store hours, the lights would go out, and the monsters inside this dimension would begin to make their presence known. When I tell you that I was fanatical about the back rooms, you really have to take my words to heart. I would even say that I was obsessed with them. I wanted to enter at all costs, no matter the sacrifices I would have to make, no matter the risk of dying. I just wanted to get to know these back rooms and know that they were real. I knew everything about the back rooms. Now, I just needed to be in them. And you see, this is much easier than people think. There are several ways to get into the back rooms. Either by a glitch in the universe, entering a certain location at a certain time of the day and under certain conditions. But there was another way, and it was ridiculously simple. I just had to go to sleep and think about the back room. Imagine that I was there and go to sleep with this thought. When I woke up, if I was lucky, I would be there. After many nights of failure, one Tuesday night, I went to sleep thinking about the grocery store back room. I tried to eat a lot and go to sleep, stimulated to have nightmares, and when I opened my eyes, I was overjoyed when I realized that I had succeeded. The back rooms were real, and I was in them. As I looked around the area, I saw all the shelves of the grocery store were full. The place was completely full, and when I saw the aisles, I confirmed what I had been looking for. The place seemed to have no beginning and no end. I took a deep breath to confirm that it was not another dream, and I smelled the characteristic smell of a wet carpet. When we dream, we don't smell odors. This was as real as it seemed. I started walking around the grocery store, playing with things and exploring everything I saw. My goal was to find the exit before I saw the monsters. I could be fulfilling my dream, but I knew where I was, and being here, I didn't want to be another victim of the back room. Anyway, I had a very clear strategy. Not to go back, to always go in the same direction, and to throw things out of the gondolas to see if I had already passed a certain place. Motivated, I walked as fast as I could. But my motivation faded as the hours went by and my desperation began to show. Even though I did everything I could to escape, the place seemed to stretch on forever, and maybe it did. A part of me thought that somehow I was going around in circles, but I wasn't, as everything was always perfectly arranged. The place really did go on forever. I ran to the exit door to see if there was any opening, but it was useless. All the exit doors were fortified. I could see how they were covered with blood and there were tools around them. Someone had tried to escape before. Suddenly, the lights started to go out and the place began to change. There was a different aura. Something was not right. It was already night. How long had I been here? I didn't feel hungry even though I hadn't eaten all day. Was this the work of the back room? Maybe time was passing faster. Suddenly, my thoughts were interrupted when a sound was heard for the first time in the entire grocery store. It was a kind of shriek. It was very loud and violent, and it was coming towards me. Whatever it was, I knew where it was even though it wasn't even looking at me. I began to run desperately forward to continue my journey until I found a miraculous way out or until it became daylight again. Suddenly, I saw a light at the bottom of one of the gondolas. This must be it. Surely this was the exit. I ran desperately towards the source of light, and that's when I realized what I was seeing was not an exit. It was not a light, much less a door. It was a living being. Its body was black and large. It didn't seem to have any shape, and it was more than 3 meters tall. The only thing I could recognize and attribute to it as a human form was its mask. But at the same time, it seemed to me the most terrifying thing. He had a terrifying white mask on top of his body. The mask was simple. It only made room for some human features, but what was behind it was clearly not human. When I stopped walking in her direction, when I realized that it was not a door and started to back away, the being started to move forward. It knew I was walking towards it, and when I stopped walking towards it, it was its turn to stalk me. The being approached me at an enormous speed, much faster than me. She didn't seem to be running, just crawling, standing still in the strangest but effective way. I threw gondolas at her to slow her down, but it was useless. It took me longer to throw them at her than she did to dodge them. I could only run. Running while I cried and regretted my silly childish obsession, wanting to get into a place that was not made for me. I hated how innocent I was for believing I understood the rules of a place that didn't even belong to my world. Behind me, I listened to the strange screams of the monster. Its voice sounded like a distorted radio getting closer and closer. I turned around to see how close she was, and it was worse than I thought. She was a few feet away from me, which was what I expected. What I didn't expect was that horrendous black tentacles were coming out of her body and stretching out to reach me. When I saw them, I was so scared that I got distracted and fell to the ground. The monster was already next to me. I was already hers, and she knew it. So she slowed down and began to approach me, slowly. Its tentacles grabbed my whole body and stopped it. They slowly drew me into the black mass of the monster, joining it. I could feel how its skin seemed alive, and it opened up to join me to its body. Suddenly, I simply woke up. I was in a cold hospital bed with strange objects they had taken out of my chest. They had just given me an electroshock. I began to close my eyes again, and I saw a strange black slime coming out of my mouth as I blacked out again. When I woke up again, I opened my eyes, but I still couldn't see anything. I began to cry out of despair. My body felt wrong. Something was not right, and the only thing that calmed me down was my mother's voice, who told me that I had woken up after a long time. After several days of assimilating what had happened, I understood that I had survived for mere seconds, something I should not have survived. The fact that I was lucky doesn't mean that I got away with it. From that day on, I had many health complications and got sick much more often than I ever did. But the worst of it all was definitely going blind. I could never see anything again. It was as if the universe had punished me for seeing too much, for seeing something I wasn't supposed to. After that day, I may have never seen anything again, but I dream a lot. I always dream about the back room and that monster. I don't want to do it, but it's like the dreams haunt me, trying to close some unfinished business between us.
Hi, I'm Alicia, and today I'm going to tell you a story from my hometown. Back in Lakewood, North Carolina, my parents used to run a grocery store. For months straight, things were getting stolen. At first, it was some bread, maybe some butter, a few boxes of cereal, and a few eggs. My parents ignored the theft and thought someone homeless or broke must be stealing the stuff. This was back in 1980. So there was no facility of CCTV cameras to catch the culprit. My parents decided to let it go and not press charges. But this continued, and when 5 expensive wine bottles were stolen, they decided they had enough and called the cops. No one could find out how the thief was stealing things, but the stuff kept getting stolen. I used to work there after high school too, and knew that none of the kids from my school were pulling the prank. My parents asked the townspeople if anyone knew anything about the theft, but no one knew anything. Every year on the 15th of May, our town has a Founding Day parade, and for that parade, the whole town is decorated. Naturally, in the spirit of the Founding Day, my parents decided to clean the entire store and decorate it. When they were cleaning the store, my mom found a dark brown liquid seeping out of the wall behind the big fridge. She cleaned it up, but more and more liquid kept coming. The more she cleaned it, the more liquid poured through the cracks in the wall. Soon, the store started to smell foul, and all the staff, the customers, and my parents had gathered around the weird liquid coming through the wall. "What's that funny smell, Dad?" I asked my father as I entered the store and saw a group of people gathered by the big fridge.
No idea, kiddo. You back from school?
Yeah, I didn't go to Jenna's place as her parents are cleaning their home too for Founders Day. Do you guys need any help?
Would you mind billing Mrs. Livingston's grocery while your mom, the staff, and I deal with this filth?
Sure thing. For the next 2 hours, my parents and every member of the staff tried multiple methods to stop the fluid from coming out of the wall cracks, but to no avail. After a point, the smell became so unbearable that we had to close the store early, despite Founders Day being just around the corner. My dad checked the other side of the wall, and a big pillar was right up against it. No drainage, nothing, just a big pillar, 15 feet tall and pretty wide, too. The next day, Dad decided to call the plumber and get it fixed. The man came in and somehow stopped the awful liquid from oozing out of the wall, but he could not find the reason as to why this liquid was coming out of the wall with no drainage pipe in sight. Meanwhile, it had been 6 days since anything was stolen from our grocery store. My parents were happy that the thief had finally decided to stop, but were upset about the smell left behind by the dirty liquid. Founders Day passed with relative ease with no new incident in the grocery store, and it looked like business was back up again. That's when our town's sheriff decided to give our store a visit. He knew about the stolen stuff from our store, so when he entered and said he might know the identity of the thief, you can imagine how my parents must have felt.
Who was it, Sheriff?
My dad asked.
A man named Samuel August. Who is Samuel August? I've never heard this name before. He used to live in this town about 20 years ago, but was thrown into prison for murder. Turns out he's back in town. He's jobless, and I strongly suspect he could have stolen food from your grocery store. Oh, that's unfortunate. But did you catch him? Where is he now? See, that's why I'm here. I don't know where he is now. He has no family in town. All of them left soon after he went to prison. So I have no idea where he's hiding.
He handed my parents a picture and asked them if they had seen anyone who looked like that.
No, I don't think we've seen anyone looking like that in our store. Have you seen this man, kiddo?
The sheriff looked at me and showed me the picture, and I stood there stunned because I had seen the man in our store. The look on my face must have said it all because the sheriff said,
You want to tell us anything, kiddo?
I just nodded and spilled out everything that had happened last week. While my parents were running errands, they asked me to look after the billing counter. The other staff was probably taking a break in the back room. That's when a man walked in. He looked as if he had seen better days. His clothes were dirty, and he looked disheveled. I asked him if he needed any help, and he just asked me to point towards the washroom. I told him it was in the back and that he had to buy something to use it. He told me he would get something on his way out. But now that I think of him, he never came out of the washroom, not that I remember of. My parents and sheriff sprinted towards the bathroom. It was highly unlikely that they were going to find the man in the bathroom after so many days. But instead of waiting in the bathroom, my dad told the sheriff that there was a loft above the store, which was unoccupied, and the way to the loft was through the bathroom ceiling. The moment my father and the sheriff opened the loft, The same foul smell engulfed the store. This time, it was much stronger than before. Immediately, the sheriff called for backup, and our whole grocery store was filled with cops and emergency care people. I was just sitting behind the cash counter, watching the horror unfold in front of me. You won't believe what must have happened. So, the moment Samuel entered the washroom, he must have noticed the way to the loft. He crawled up there and was living there for a while, stealing food and wine from our shop. But when the news spread that my dad had informed the cops about the theft and that the cops were looking into it, he got scared. Instead of getting out of the loft and getting out of town, he decided to explore the loft even more. The loft gradually narrowed and reached the beam outside. Turns out the beam was hollow from the inside and had enough place for a skinny person like Samuel to hide in. To get away from the cops, Samuel hid into the beam. He could go in just fine, but could not get out, and he died trapped inside the beam. The dirty brown liquid was coming out of his degrading body. The rotten and mangled body was retrieved from the loft, and I had puked in the dustbin beside me at the sight and smell of it. That was my grocery store horror story. What was yours? Being a European person, it's no news that I need alcohol frequently. Since the day I moved to the States, I cannot find a decent place to get my beer from. So I had to settle for beer brought from the grocery store. It's not bad, but it's not as good as the beer I used to have back home. Luckily, there is a small family grocery store 1 block away from my condo. Although the family that runs this store is Chinese, they have stuff from all over the world in their small store. When I found out from my neighbor that the tofu sold in that store is pretty good, I started frequenting the store. Mr. Chang and his wife quickly became my friends. For them, I was the tall, blonde girl with blue eyes who was always smiling. They could not pronounce my name, Valencia Maxwell, so they settled on calling me Val. When I told them how much I hate the beer sold in the States, they offered to order beer for me from my home country if I bought it in bulk. I was more than delighted to do that, so I asked them to order a few dozen cans for me. I also paid some in advance, and now I'm one of their favorite customers. Especially Mrs. Chang. She loved me like her own daughter, who was studying at MIT. She many times made some extra Chinese food for me. For me, the best part of living in the U.S. had become the Chang family. However, the neighborhood I lived in was a few blocks away from the rough neighborhood of the city. So frequently, we would hear about break-ins into homes, restaurants, shops, and sometimes even street fights, or, in the worst case, murders. But most of my neighborhood was oblivious to all this, as things never seemed to happen in our neighborhood. One evening, as always, I visited the Chang's family supermarket with the hopes of grabbing a beer. Although I paid for all the beer as soon as it was delivered, I did not take all the beer home. I had no space in my fridge to store it, so Mrs. Chang offered to keep it in their big fridges. "Hey, Mrs. Chang, how are you today?" "Oh, Val, I'm amazing as always. You here for the beer?" "Yes, ma'am." "Okay, just grab this tiffin while you leave. It's already late. Instead of ordering food, just eat what I have packed for you." When I went to the counter with my beer in hand, I said, "Thanks so much for the meal, Miss Chang. You make sure I don't miss my mother all the way here." "You are like my own child, Val. Eat up well, and do not forget to lock the doors and windows behind you." That was weird. Mrs. Chang never told me to lock my door and windows before that. "Why, Mrs. Chang? What happened?" "Did you not hear?" "Hear what?" "Oh, Val, someone broke into an apartment upstairs on the 3rd floor, stole a bunch of stuff. Thank God the owner wasn't home. Otherwise, who knows, he might have even been shot." This was terrifying for me to know, as I lived alone in my condo. Mrs. Chang's supermarket was situated on the ground floor of the residential building. That night onwards, I double-checked my doors and windows before going to bed and before leaving for work. After that break-in, the whole neighborhood was on edge. The cops couldn't find out who the culprit was, which means the thief was on the loose and could attack our neighborhood. Everyone was acting as if our neighborhood was haunted. It was funny in an ironic way. I, too, made sure to do everything I could to keep my place safe. However, I did visit Mrs. Chang daily. One evening, I had to work extra late. It was almost 11 p.m. by the time I drove into my block. The next day was a weekend, so I did not mind getting home late. But while going home, I remembered that I had no beer at home, so I decided to take a pit stop at the supermarket and grab a few cans to last me for the weekend. I was also going to have a small get-together with colleagues at my place, so I decided to take more cans with me than usual. As I entered the supermarket, Mrs. Chang was behind the counter counting cash from a register. "Hey, Mrs. Chang?" I greeted her as I made my way to the back of the store in search of a familiar fridge. "You late tonight," I could hear Mrs. Chang say from her position. But as soon as I opened the fridge to get my cans, I heard a glass break from the front of the store. I was just about to run to the front to see what happened when I heard a male voice.
Hey you, old lady. Anyone in the shop?
The male voice sounded angry and agitated. "No, it's just me. My husband just left. Please, do not hurt me," Mrs. Chang pleaded with the intruder. Till then, I snuck into a few aisles towards the front. That's when I saw the man wearing a ski mask pointing a gun at Mrs. Chang's head. My first reaction was to run towards her, but when I heard what she said, I knew what she wanted me to do. "I'm alone. You can take whatever you want from the supermarket," she said with a trembling voice, trying hard to be strong. She was trying to make the intruder believe that there was no one except her in there. I immediately pulled up my phone and called 911. I told the cops what was happening.
Hey old lady, give me all the cash you have. Put it in this bag.
The intruder shouted at Mrs. Chang, whose eyes were tearing. Accidentally, in my effort of going back to my previous spot, I knocked over a bottle of jam and it clattered to the ground.
Who's there? Who's there? You better come out, or I'll shoot the old lady,
the thief said in a very loud voice. I knew I had no choice but to show my face in order to save Mrs. Chang. And in our circumstance, I didn't want to let her get hurt or die alone, but I was still hesitant. "It's just a stray cat that comes at night sometimes." Mrs. Chang tried to save me, but the intruder was smarter.
Huh, you think you can fool me, old hag?
And he hit her face with the butt of his gun. That's when I stepped out of my hiding spot, but little did the intruder know that I had called the cops. Therefore, on purpose, I hid my phone underneath a pickle jar. The moment he saw me, the intruder approached me with his gun. Aiming at my head, he searched my pockets while he pointed the gun in my face. He found some money in my pockets, but I was clever. I had left my purse along with my ID cards in the back of the store, so he couldn't find anything of value for me. Till then, Mrs. Chang had filled the bag with money. "Here, take this bag and leave us alone," Mrs. Chang said to the armed robber. When he took the bag from her hand, he hit her again with his gun and fired a bullet into my shoulder.
Where's the rest of the money, you Chinese bitch?
"That's all we made today," Mrs. Chang told him while she kept on sobbing. That's when we all could hear the sirens coming our way.
You bitch! You called the cops!
He yelled at me. I just shook my head, lying to him that I didn't. As the cops approached us, the intruder panicked, looked here and there. At the end of the supermarket, there was a back door that Mr. Chang often used. The intruder ran towards that door, he yanked it open, and bam! He fell on his ass and hit his head on a metal shelf, and he fainted on the spot. Mr. Chang entered the supermarket with a worried look on his face and a frying pan in his hand. I had not just called the cops, but Mr. Chang as well. He might have heard our conversation with the robber and figured out that the thief might use the back door to run. He took the bag of money and the gun from his hand and ran towards me and Mrs. Chang. I was holding her in my arms as she cried. Soon the cops arrived, and the thief was caught. He was a homeless man. When the cops left and Mr. Chang was okay, I grabbed my beer and the tiffin that was supposedly still on the counter and was about to step out when I remembered something. "Hey, Mrs. Chang, I clearly remember you counting a thick bundle of hundreds while I walked in. How come the intruder only had $500 in his bag? Mrs. Chang smiled and replied, "While he was looking at you, I dropped a bundle to the floor and only gave him the 10s and 20s. I may not have laughed that hard in days, but it was truly scary to have a gun pointed at my head."